What's up, everybody? Welcome into the Next Pats podcast. I'm Phil Perry coming at you from Philadelphia. The Patriots just had 2 joint practices with the Eagles. We're recording this ahead of Thursday night's game here in Philly, and we've got a lot to talk about. We have a stat that will absolutely blow your mind about Patriots joint practice opponents. Make sure you stick around for that. We're also bringing in NBC Sports Philly's Dave Zangaro to tell us all we need to know about this Eagle roster, any potential Pats on this Eagle roster. We're also getting to your questions, and we're going to go rapid fire, getting as many as we can. We're even inserting a little clock here to keep me honest. It should be ridiculous. Hopefully I survive. It's going to be a great show. Okay, so about that mind-bending statistic that I wanted to tell you about, listen to this. Did you know, over the course of the last decade, the Patriots have had 15 joint practice opponents, doesn't include the Eagles, and they've signed at least one player from each of those 15 teams. 27 players in all have come from these joint practice sessions. The Patriots have seen them over the summer. They've seen them up close, and they have eventually brought them on. Offensive guys, defensive guys, special teamers, roster fodder, guys who ended up being starters, star players. They've worked against them all, and they've worked against them up close. And obviously they get a chance to see what these players can do on the field, but they get a chance to see what these players are like in between practice reps, what they're like with their teammates, what they're like with their coaches, what's their attitude when they're out there for practice. And it's the middle of summer and they're in full pads and there's contact and it sucks. How do those players respond? All of that stuff makes these joint practice sessions incredibly valuable scouting opportunities. So you want to hear the list? I'm going to give you the list, and we're going to work our way back. Okay. So 2010 versus the Falcons, Bill Belichick and Thomas Dimitroff, close relationship there. He was the GM of the Falcons at the time. They end up signing Michael Jenkins, the receiver, and the Saints that same year. Ramon Humber, Will Smith, both of those guys the Patriots practiced against, both eventually came to the Patriots. No joint practices in 2011. They had the lockout. 2012, it was the Bucs. LeGarrette Blount, everybody remembers him. Aqib Talib, E.J. Biggers, Dakota Watson, all of those guys eventually became Patriots. Travaris Cadet that same summer was with the Saints. Patriots, of course, practiced with them. Jonathan Casillas, Akeem Hicks, all of those guys were Saints, all became Patriots. In 2013, Patrick Chung, that one doesn't really count. We know the Patriots already knew a little bit of something about Patrick Chung. But Damaris Johnson, the receiver, Bradley Fletcher, the corner, they came to New England eventually. Same summer, 2013, the Bucs again. Tim Wright, part of that Logan Mankins trade, right? He makes his way to New England. 2014, they see the Eagles again. Okay, Bradley Fletcher's the only guy who ended up making the Patriots from that roster, but we'll still count it, even though we already counted him from the 2013 summer. 2015, they see the Saints again. Hicks is still on the roster then. Humber's still on the roster then. How about Brandon Cooks? That guy ended up having a pretty big role for the Patriots a couple of years later. Then 2016, the following year, against the Bears, the Patriots signed, no way anybody here remembers this name, Rob Hausler, tight end. They got him to a futures contract later in 2016. They saw the Saints again in 2016. Brandon Cooks still there. The Jaguars in 2017. Luke Bowengo, 2017 versus the Texans, an absolute bonanza. Eric Lee, Riley McCarron, Ufomba Kamalu, Eddie Pleasant, Steven Anderson, the tight end. They all made their way to New England. There were no joint practices in 2018. In 2019, they played the Lions and the Titans. They ended up with Johnny Smith from Tennessee, of course. And from Detroit, they landed D. Virgin, the corner, who I've actually had on my roster projection a couple different times if you've been paying close attention to those, because he's playing a lot of special teams for the Patriots. And he's got a lot of work with Matthew Slater specifically. So an interesting name there. I'm going to catch my breath here. And while I do that, won't you please welcome in our friend, Dave Zangaro. Okay, very happy to have with us now our buddy from NBC Sports Philadelphia, Dave Zangaro. And Dave, nobody better to bring on when we talk about the bubble, quote unquote, because that's where at least part of my focus is at this time of year, especially during these joint practice sessions. And I'll tell you the stat that I just told our listeners, but over the course of the last decade, the Patriots have had 15 sets of joint practices. They have signed at least one player from those rosters that they worked against every single time. So there's somebody that's on this Eagles roster right now that's going to end up on the Patriots. I don't know who it is, but that's why you're here. You're here to tell us who might not be on the team moving forward, but you think might actually play and might have shown, especially over the course of the last 2 days, to the Patriots that he has some value. So is there anyone that stands out to you specifically? I love to start at the corner position because I just think they're thin there, right? No Stephon Gilmore after JC Jackson, a lot of questions. Anybody at that corner spot, Dave, that you feel like could be a future Patriot?
Yeah, I jotted down some names, a little inside magic here. You told me a few positions, so I went through, and yeah, cornerback, the Eagles aren't super deep, but there's a few names of guys who are going to get cut, most likely. One of them is Josiah Scott. They just traded a late round pick for him, so he has a chance to make the roster, but he's not a sure thing. He's a nickel. I mean, he's smaller. He's like 5'9". He's nicknamed the Gnat, and he kind of plays like that. He's kind of an irritant as a defensive back, but a draft pick last year, has some talent, came from Jacksonville. I think he's a guy who, if he'll end up somewhere if he doesn't make this roster. I don't think he'd make it to the Eagles practice squad. I think that there's enough buzz around him that he might end up somewhere else. So if they're looking for a nickel, he's the guy. If they want a very different body type, Michael Jacquet. He was an undrafted rookie last year out of Louisiana Lafayette, and he's long. He's like 6'2". Doesn't have blazing speed, but that length helps him catch up a little bit. He got thrown into action last year, didn't play very well, but they asked him to play a lot of man, and it was kind of unfortunate for him. I don't think he's going to make this roster. He's someone they'd probably like to keep around on the practice squad if he doesn't, but if the Pats are looking for corners and he kind of fits a mold of what they might want, that would make some sense.
Do you know, Dave, either of those guys have been legitimate special teams options for them this summer?
Scott's a little tricky because he's obviously undersized. Jacquet can be. I mean, Jacquet is big enough that he can get his nose in there on some special teams. So if you're looking for a guy like a bottom of the roster type corner, he might make more sense there. Whereas Scott, not that he can't play special teams, but he's also a little limited when you're talking about he's a nickel only defender. So if you need that, if you want that in a backup, that's fine. But Jacquet's probably more versatile.
Yeah, it's interesting the way it's shaping up for the Patriots right now because Jonathan Jones got banged up a little bit on Monday. We didn't see him on Tuesday. Indications are right now that it's nothing serious and that he'll be back, but they don't really have many straight nickel options right after Jonathan Jones. They do have Jalen Mills, who they just brought on, former Eagle, who you know very well, Dave, but I don't know if they would want him there all the time. I think Mills's value is in his versatility, somebody you can move around a bunch. So Scott is actually sort of an interesting name in case something were to happen to Jonathan Jones. They're not super deep there, but it's really on the outside that I think they're thinnest. And it sounds like Jacquet, he's over 6 feet tall and he's a little long based on what you're saying. Maybe that's somebody who would work here, but it sounds like maybe not a man guy. And that's really what they love to do. Do you think he could learn that in New England?
Yeah, it's not that he's like bad in man. It was just that they kind of threw him out there last year. He didn't have a ton of experience. And last year, all rookies were kind of in a tough spot without the preseason and without spring practices. So all of a sudden he's out there, and I think he was on the practice squad and they brought him up. And then all of a sudden he's like playing 85% of the snaps because they needed him. So I think that there might be something there. I don't think he's ever going to be a top flight player, but yeah, he can fill a need for a little while.
Yeah, just looking to fill potential roster spots down the line. I mean, it would be funny if I just showed you the whole list of these guys that they've acquired from these training camp rosters before, but I would say 70% of the names are guys you've never heard of, right?
They're probably went through this. Who's like the most notable?
Well, Jonnu Smith, they practiced against a couple years ago.
Yeah.
Brandon Cooks was a big name they'd practiced against. Akeem Hicks was a big name they'd practiced against that they acquired. But let me actually look because they practiced against the Eagles in 2013. I had the list right here. They ended up picking up Damaris Johnson. I don't know if you remember him.
Oh, yeah. Tiny little slot receiver return guy.
Yeah. Little guy. Bradley Fletcher they brought on in 2015 as a free agent. So I just think they look at it and they say, okay, number one, can the guy play? And we get a chance to look at his skill set. But number two is how does he handle himself in between reps? What does he look like as a teammate? What kind of energy does he bring to the field? Do they have him? if you're just working off the tape, you might never see if a guy is on, maybe he's not on the first team core special teams units, but maybe he's on the second team for everything. And you might get a chance to see that during practice. And I think they find all that stuff valuable. I want to ask you about the tight end position, speaking of Jonnu Smith, Dave, because obviously what they have in Philly is a tight end centric sort of offense with Goddard and Ertz. And I'm just wondering how deep they are at that spot, because it did look to me like they have a couple other guys who can play there that are at least physically kind of imposing. And the Patriots are dealing with a couple injuries now. Again, I don't think they're serious, but they might want some depth there eventually at that position. So is there anybody there that you think might be on the bubble, or are they just looking to load up on tight ends and keep everybody they have?
Well, yeah, the situation of tight end in Philly is a little tricky right now because Ertz is still here, and a lot of people didn't think he was going to be. So you have Ertz and Goddard at the top. They still have Richard Rodgers, who had a pretty good year last year. I mean, if he were to end up getting cut, which I don't think is crazy, I think, a lot of times the Eagles like to play this game where they'll cut a vested vet and bring him back in week 2 so they don't have to guarantee his salary. So maybe they try to do that with Richard Rodgers, and a team like the Patriots swoops in and grabs him. Tyree Jackson's probably the guy who you were talking about. He's former University of Buffalo quarterback, 6'7", 250. He actually got hurt in Tuesday's practice. He's out for really 8 to 10 weeks with a fracture in his back. So any thoughts of getting him are gone. But they have some depth there. One guy to keep in mind is Jack Stoll, undrafted rookie from Nebraska. Kind of had a really slow start to his training camp, but he's picked it up over the last few weeks. He's looked pretty solid in a lot of different phases, can play some special teams. And he was a guy who the Eagles clearly liked when they signed him because he got a ton of guaranteed money for an undrafted player. So I don't think there's a spot for him right now. That they'd probably like to get him to the practice squad, and that they're probably going to have to subject him to waivers. So he'll probably be available.
That might end up being my favorite name that you mentioned today, Dave, because I actually included Jack Stoll in our series that we call our prototypical Patriot series. We're just kind of looking at physical traits and if they check the boxes. And I'm looking at my notes now, 4'6", 40 at almost 250 pounds, 6'8", 6'3" cone, sub-7 second 3 cone for a big guy like that. The Patriots love that. He also, it sounds like he's an amazing student. He was a Big Ten distinguished scholar in 2020, academic all Big Ten. Bill Belichick loves that sort of stuff too. So that's one that's certainly worth keeping an eye on. And it's too bad to hear about Jackson. I did not realize he broke his back. He made what was almost an incredible catch in the back of the end zone. I don't know if he got upended or if he just landed awkwardly, but he did land right on his back. And
yeah, I don't think anyone touched him. He just floated and he landed flat on his back. It looked bad. He returned to practice, and then we found out today he has a fracture. So
yeah, that's too bad, because he is a great athlete. I remember him coming out of Buffalo, as a really good athlete, and wondering how it would work. And it seems like he's at least got some ability as a receiver. It's too bad he's injured. And Richard Rodgers is interesting too. Massachusetts guy, pride of St. John Shrewsbury here. And he's carved out a nice little career for himself. He's been in the league a long time now. So good for him. Another guy worth remembering for us. Dave, before I let you go, is there anybody plain and simple who you would consider on the bubble, regardless of position, that had a nice 2 days of practice, that, even if the Patriots, have plenty of depth there, they maybe just look at this guy and say, hey, if that guy pops free, it might be worth trying to stash him somewhere?
Yeah, it actually would fill a need too, I think, for the Patriots, as a tackle, Brett Toth. He's an interesting guy because he played college he was an Army guy, so they didn't, he's getting used to pass protection, which is kind of a weird deal. But he's a good player. He's someone they really like. They were willing to risk it a few years ago, and he ended up in Arizona for a year, and now he's back with the Eagles. On merit, he probably deserves a spot, but the Eagles kind of a logjam there. And how many offensive linemen are they going to keep? Probably not a lot. He's someone to keep in mind, Brett Toth.
Looks like he's a pretty long guy, 6'6". If he's got some athleticism to him. I mean, you said it. The Patriots look like they're set at their starting spots with Isaiah Wynn and Trent Brown. Those guys are the two clear-cut top guys. And they have a guy that they like, who they drafted last year, in Justin Herron. But after that, at tackle, it gets a little dicey. And so it wouldn't surprise me at all if they were looking for a little depth there, especially because Trent Brown and Isaiah Wynn tend to miss time. So might not be a bad idea for them to add a body or two there. Dave, this has been unbelievably helpful. I feel like now I'm going to be fully prepared for whenever this inevitably happens, whether it's this offseason, next offseason. I'm predicting it right now, and I'm going to give you all the credit. They're going to end up with one of these guys. There's no doubt.
Which guy? What do you think? Jack Stoll? Is he the guy?
One of them, but I'm going to put Jack Stoll in in sort of the pole position. Jack Stoll's name is on a bullet. Is got a bullet right next to it in my list here. And if that happens, we'll bring you back on. And we'll let you just take a victory lap.
I like that. Yeah, take that for sure.
Awesome. Dave, thanks so much for being with us, man.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're throwing 10 minutes on the clock here, and we're going to get to everybody's mailbag questions. Thanks to Dave. Hopefully you guys enjoyed that conversation. I love that stuff. Hopefully we get some nerds out there who love it too. But let's get to the questions. The clock's already running. First one from Centenary. What are the Patriots holding up the Gilmore situation for? They have plenty of cap space to make this right. You're not wrong. They do have plenty of cap space. I think they need to see Gilmore get on the field, and I think Gilmore needs to see some money before he gets on the field. That's the stalemate. I wouldn't be shocked if we saw Stephon Gilmore miss the entirety of preseason, all 3 games, and maybe they can get him on the field by the end of camp. Claire Cooper says, hey, Phil, I have an easy one. Should I be panicking over all these tight end injuries? I don't think you should be panicking, Claire, because I think those guys will be ready. I do think, though, this is going to impact how quickly they are really ready to be big-time contributors come the regular season. You can't make up for lost reps. Johnny Foxborough is next. He says, hi, Phil. For the first time, you've alluded to O-line troubles during the Philadelphia joints. This would doom the season no matter who is a QB. Easy, Johnny. Any details or just a few bad days against a solid D-line? Monday was really the rough day. 4 sacks is what I had of Cam Newton. No holes to speak of against the run defense for the Eagles. They have a great defensive line. It's going to be a really, really significant test for the Patriots backups, because even when the Eagles on Thursday get their D-line starters out of the game, they have depth. They are good across the board up front there. And so if you're seeing James Ferentz, Justin Herron, Yadni Kajus, Corey Cunningham going against the backups for the Eagles, that's going to be a matchup, in my opinion, that really favors Philly. So a test for them and a test for the quarterbacks. Make sure you got to get the ball out of your hand there, because you don't want to get drilled. The Mojo says, is it feasible to trade Gilmore and Harry for one of Philly's receivers, then trade Sony and Winovich for a decent corner from some other NFC team? And would you? Boy, a lot of names there. I think the Patriots will be open to trading Harry and or Sony Michel if the price is right. Winovich, I'd add him to the list as well. I'm not moving Gilmore just yet, because I don't know if you're going to get commensurate value back in that kind of trade right now. Stairway to 7 says, is the QB competition over? Bill going with Cam no matter what. And we need another receiver. It's starting to get a little worrisome about that group. I'm butchering this tweet, but you get the idea. I don't think the competition is over by any stretch. I believe Thursday night could, to some extent, be Cam's last stand. I think the Patriots have very obviously been giving Cam Newton a chance to grab this job by the throat and not let go. He hasn't done that yet. It's been relatively close, in my opinion. And I think there are certain elements of their respective games that really aren't close. Obviously, Cam Newton is going to bring mobility and quarterback run game specific elements to the offense that Mac Jones just will not. Mac Jones, in my opinion, is going to be the more efficient deep ball thrower and the more accurate passer. So the question is, if it's overall close and you're looking at these two players, which skill set, obviously they're extremely different, would you rather have? My guess is that they would rather play the rookie, not only because of the skill set, but also because they have a future with this guy. They want to find out if he can play. They want him to be able to play well, and play here for a long time. The same cannot be said for Cam Newton. And while every regular season game matters, I do think, based on history, Bill Belichick will treat the early portion of the season like an extension of the preseason. And so just because Mac Jones isn't a starter in week 1 of the actual preseason or week 2 of the actual preseason, and who knows about week 3, if he's starting games early in the regular season and they're not winning, as long as Bill Belichick and Josh McDaniels see growth and they see development, I think they're going to be okay with that. And again, I think what will make them especially okay with that decision would be that we gave Mac everything we could this summer and he held his own. He digested everything we put on his plate. He made it a real competition all summer long. And because it was close, we decided to go with the guy that we want to play here for a long time. That to me would be a totally reasonable assessment on their part. And so to answer your question, no, it's not over. And no, Bill is not going with Cam no matter what. He wants to win these games, but he also wants to see his first round pick. We've already seen that he wants to see his first round pick. They're splitting first team reps at times this summer. He's going to get a lot of reps again on Thursday against the Eagles after 2 days. And through long stretches of these two competitive practices against the Eagles, I thought Mac Jones was the better player. And you can read our quarterback reports on NBCSportsBoston.com. I recently wrote a down the field explosive offense. What can this Patriots unit do on that side of the ball to force defenses to defend, quote unquote, every blade of grass, which is what they want to do? I think Cam Newton's a good option for that. And I don't think they've ruled out that he will be the week one guy. Let's move on. We got tons of more questions and not a lot of time here. So let's go. If Mac plays now and they make the playoffs, he'll have played almost 2 college seasons by the AFC Championship game. Will the process be quicker if he played to start the season, or can he learn as quickly from the bench? I think there's arguments on both sides of it. I do find it funny that people always point to the Patrick Mahomes example and the Tom Brady example of players who sat out for a year, and look how that turned out. Brady, to his credit, has said many times that that did help him quite a bit, and I'm sure it did. He was a 6th round rookie. In college, just was not throwing the football as much as it is now. I think the college passers coming out of the college ranks in today's NFL are so much more polished in terms of their ability to throw the football that it's just a different world. So I don't find that example incredibly apt. The Patrick Mahomes example, I find almost laughable, because as soon as that guy hit the ground in the NFL, including in his rookie year where he got a little bit of playing time, he looked phenomenal. And so the Chiefs had a good team that year. They were ready to compete. And I wonder what that season would have ended up looking like had they just actually played Patrick Mahomes the entire time and not gone with Alex Smith. I find it dubious that he would have fallen on his face. So that might have fallen into the category of not so great a decision. It looks fine because they made the playoffs and they kind of contended, but they really didn't. They could have gone with the riskier, quote unquote, riskier move, played the kid, and they might have ended up better off. You know, so there's many ways to think about this. I think Bill Belichick is not at all risk averse based on his career. And if you think Mac Jones starting as a rookie is a risk, I think Bill Belichick might say, so what? Big bad bear. Do the Patriots get more tight end depth? Holy moly. I think they're going to be looking for it. And I wouldn't be shocked if it was this guy from the Eagles. I love that call from Dave Zangaro. Callie Dad says, is there a scenario where all the running backs make the final roster? Harris, Michelle, White, Taylor, and Stevenson. Left out Brandon Bolden there too. And maybe he doesn't make the final roster, but maybe he's on the roster week 2 or whatever because he's a great special teams player and they really like him. Sure, I could see that happening. I don't think it's totally out of the realm of possibility. Based on what you have seen so far, any prediction on the Patriots regular season record? 9-7, 10-6, 8-8. Well, first of all, you got to factor in we got 17 games this year. That's from Ragu. So Ragu, I'm going to say I like 11-6. 11-6. Let's roll with that for now. I hope you're going to cover who's the standout from last 2 days of joint practices in Philly. That's from Push Pal. I would say the last 2 practices, the star has been James White has been one of them. Haven't heard a lot about James White in training camp. If you've been following closely, to me, he looks good. And I think he could be, with the right quarterback and the right offense, he could be an extremely productive player after having kind of a down year statistically last year. He's one for me. I would say another, J.C. Jackson to me continues to play and play really well. He's had a very, very good camp. Matt Judon, there's another defender for you. So there's 3 names. Well, how about Sean Don says the likelihood of one of our RBs getting traded for a wide receiver? I don't see it, not for a wide receiver of much value. If you're trading Sony Michel, I think it's for a late round pick or a bottom of the roster receiver, if that's the position you're looking to address. If Bill suddenly realizes the Pats need a number 1 wide receiver before the season, so a lot of questions about receivers. Guys, Nelson Aguilar is being paid like a top 25 receiver. He's going to be their number one. I think Jacoby Myers has looked really good. I think Kendrick Bourne has looked really good at times. I think those guys are going to split maybe the quote unquote number 2 role / number 3 role. And that's how it's going to go. As long as those 3 guys are healthy, it's going to be Aguilar, in my opinion, who gets the most snaps. He's being paid the most money. Sometimes it is that easy. Then Myers and Bourne, somewhere in the same range in terms of playing time. Is it time to start panicking about Gilmore? I wouldn't panic yet about Gilmore. All he has to do, and our time is up, that's Jeff Scanlon. Whew, guys, I'm out of breath. Don't panic about Gilmore because nothing's really changed. He's going to want to play eventually. He's going to want more money. Are the Patriots going to meet him? I think they are, because I think they're going to understand that they do need him on the field. It's just a question of how desperate are they and how desperate is he to make sure that he gets a guaranteed bump. It would be surprising to me if that's what he got. It would not be surprising if that's what he wanted. But if you look back at 2018, Tom Brady and Rob Gronkowski, both looking for raises, both got heavy incentive-laden bumps, quote unquote, in their contracts. 2019, Brady got a real bump, but in 2018, no. And he was the quarterback coming off a Super Bowl in 2018 and an MVP in 2017. Gilmore is a corner over 30 coming off an okay year and off an injury. It's just, in my opinion, he does not have a ton of leverage here. And I think the Patriots, if it gets really dire, will they actually look to move him? Ooh, that would take some courage on Bill Belichick's part because he just built this defense up. You really want to contend. Gilmore's still arguably your best corner. But it's going to be a tough one to figure out. Don't panic, but ask that question, Jeff, in another couple weeks, the next time we do one of these mailbags for Next Pats. And I might have a more definitive answer for you. All right, that's it for this week, guys. Thank you so much for the questions. If you asked a question and it wasn't answered, check out the mailbag this week on NBCSportsBoston.com. I'm sure, unless it was utterly ridiculous, it made it in there. Thanks again for your contributions. As always, thanks for listening, and thanks to Dave Zangaro for joining us. That's your Next Pats for this week. Everybody, enjoy the Patriots-Eagles game, and we'll talk to you next week.